Be still. Before another thought moves, before another worry tries to announce itself, before the mind reaches forward into imagined futures, be still. Not because the world is quiet, but because you must become quiet enough to hear what has always been true. Worry has never solved a single problem. Not one. It has never added a day to your life, never brought clarity, never produced wisdom. Scripture speaks plainly when it asks, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature? This is not a rebuke, it is a revelation. Worry is effort applied in the wrong direction. And tonight, something deeper than reassurance is being offered to you. Not comfort but law. Not optimism but alignment. Not a technique but a way of living that makes worry unnecessary. To stop worrying forever does not mean life becomes effortless. It means life becomes governed. Governed by order. Governed by intelligence. Governed by a power that does not panic, does not rush, and does not fail. That power is not outside you. It never was. When Scripture speaks of God, it is not speaking of a distant ruler managing crises from afar. It is speaking of the creative intelligence that animates all things, the same intelligence that grows the seed in darkness, that guides the stars without effort, that sustains your breath without instruction. And the invitation has always been the same. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is not inactivity. It is surrender of false responsibility. Worry is the assumption that the burden is yours. Faith is the recognition that it never was. Most people live exhausted not because life is too heavy, but because they are carrying what they were never meant to carry. They are trying to solve problems from the surface of the mind, while the solution exists at a deeper level of being. Jesus never worried, not because problems didn't appear, but because he understood where cause resides. When storms arose, he slept. When lack appeared, he gave thanks. When opposition intensified, he withdrew into stillness. This was not avoidance. It was alignment. He knew that the Father within does the work. This is the secret that dissolves worry at its root. You are not the doer. You are the chooser. You choose the state. God fulfills the state. Worry begins when you try to manage outcomes instead of aligning consciousness. It is the attempt to predict, control, and protect from a limited point of view. But divine intelligence does not operate from limitation. It operates from totality. When you worry, you are saying without words, I don't trust the intelligence that governs my life. And when you trust, you are saying without effort, I release this to a higher order. This is not passive resignation. It is active faith. Faith is not believing things will work out somehow. Faith is knowing that what you consent to internally must externalize. Because consciousness is law. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. To cast a burden is not to throw words upward. It is to release inner tension. You do not hand God your problem by thinking about it harder. You hand it over by letting go of the state of worry itself. Because the state is the problem. Worry is a state of consciousness that assumes lack of support, lack of guidance, lack of order. And every state reproduces itself. So the instruction is simple, but exacting. Change the state, and the problem reorganizes. This is why worrying feels so natural to the untrained mind. It feels like responsibility. But responsibility does not mean anxiety. Responsibility means right alignment. You are responsible for your inner posture. God is responsible for the outcome. This is the division of labor. And when you violate it, you suffer. Not because you are punished, but because you are out of order. Order is peace. When you assume the feeling of being supported, guided, and carried, you align with the same intelligence that moves galaxies without stress. Science quietly agrees with this ancient truth. Systems function best when interference is minimal. Over-control creates instability. Coherence creates flow. The nervous system reflects this. When you trust, the body relaxes. When you worry, it tightens. Your body knows before your mind admits it. So worry is not wisdom. It is a signal that you have forgotten who is in charge. And now, you are remembering. To let God solve every problem does not mean problems vanish instantly. It means you stop feeding them with fear. Fear is attention given to an imagined future without faith. And attention is creative. What you repeatedly imagine with feeling becomes structure. So worry is imagination misused. Faith is imagination aligned. When Jesus said, Take no thought for tomorrow. He was not dismissing responsibility. He was redirecting imagination. Tomorrow will be shaped by the state you occupy today. If today is filled with trust, tomorrow inherits order. If today is filled with worry, tomorrow inherits confusion. So the practice is not to eliminate thought, but to sanctify it. Each time a problem appears, you pause not to analyze, but to recenter. You say inwardly, calmly, without drama, "This is not mine to carry." Intelligence is already handling this. And then this is crucial. You relax. Relaxation is not laziness. It is faith embodied. You do not need to feel euphoric. You do not need to feel certain emotionally. You need to feel released. Released from urgency. Released from strain. Released from the illusion of control. Because the moment you release, the deeper mind begins to work. And the deeper mind is not bound by linear logic. It connects what you cannot see. It moves people, timing, resources, and ideas into place without noise. This is how solutions arrive unexpectedly, not because they are random, but because they were not forced. Worry blocks solutions because it keeps consciousness focused on the problem state. Trust dissolves problems because it shifts consciousness to the solution state. This is why gratitude is powerful. It is not politeness, it is confirmation. When you give thanks before resolution, you are declaring alignment with divine order. You are saying, "I trust the unseen process." And the unseen responds. You are not here to figure out how God will solve it. You are here to stop interfering. This is the hardest and holiest discipline, non-interference. You do your part in the world, make the call, take the step, show up, but you do it without inattention. Action without anxiety is inspired. Action with anxiety is forced. And forced action exhausts the soul. So now, begin to live differently. When a problem appears, notice your first impulse. Is it contraction? Is it urgency? Is it fear? Do not judge it. Simply choose again. Choose the belief. There is an intelligence handling this more perfectly than I ever could. Then rest in that assumption. Rest is not sleep. It is inner agreement. And agreement is powerful. Not my will, but thine be done. That's in this too say. This was not surrender to loss. It was surrender to higher order. And higher order always resolves what lower effort cannot. As this becomes your way of living, you will notice something profound. Problems begin to lose their emotional charge before they lose their form. They may still exist, but they no longer dominate you. And domination was the real suffering. Peace returns first. Resolution follows. Always in that order. You will begin to trust life again, not blindly, but intelligently. You will sense that even delays are purposeful. Even obstacles are instructional. Even uncertainty is part of orchestration. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. And nothing requires your worry to function. So let this become your daily devotion, not a ritual, but a posture. When worry arises, you do not fight it. You replace it with trust. You say inwardly, "I release this to the intelligence that governs my life." I sow it, and then you breathe. And in that breath, you align. This is how worry ends, not by suppression, but by irrelevance. It fades because it no longer serves a function. Trust has taken its place. And now, as this voice grows quiet, remain still, not waiting, not hoping, but resting in the deepest truth you can know. You are supported. You are guided. You are carried by an intelligence that does not fail. Let God do what God does best. And let yourself finally be free. Be still. It is handled. And now, let this truth move from something you hear into something you inhabit. Because worry does not live in words. It lives in habit. And habits are not broken by force. They are dissolved by understanding. The mind worries because it has been trained to believe that vigilance equals safety. That if it stays tense, alert, rehearsing worst-case outcomes, somehow it will prevent pain. But this is a misunderstanding of protection. True protection does not come from tension. It comes from alignment. The most protected systems in nature are the most relaxed. The heart beats without strain. The lungs breathe without effort. The planets move without anxiety. Nothing essential survives by worrying itself into control, and neither do you. So when worry arises again, and it will, not because you are failing, But because the old habit is loosening you, meet it differently now. You do not argue with it. You do not shame yourself for it. You do not dramatize it. You simply recognize it as a signal that you are momentarily forgetting who carries the weight. And you return to the feeling of being held, return to the assumption of order, return to the quiet, knowing that intelligence is already active where your awareness is not. This returning is prayer, not spoken prayer, but lived prayer, prayer as posture, prayer as trust, prayer as release. When Scripture says pray without ceasing, it is not asking you to repeat words endlessly. It is asking you to remain aligned. Alignment is ceaseless prayer, and alignment feels like relief. You will begin to notice that the moment you stop worrying, insight often appears. A solution suggests itself. A next step becomes obvious. A conversation feels less charged. This is not coincidence. The mind cannot receive guidance while it is clenched. Release creates receptivity. This is why Jesus often asked questions before healing. Not because he needed information, but because he was drawing attention away from panic and into awareness. Do you believe? Belief is not mental agreement. It is inner permission. Permission for life to resolve itself through higher order. So you give permission now not once, but repeatedly. Each time you choose trust over worry, you strengthen the pathway of peace. And what you practice becomes natural. Soon, you will notice that worry no longer lasts as long. It arises, but it does not stay. It knocks, but it is not invited in. And eventually, it stops knocking altogether because it has lost its authority. Authority has returned to where it belongs. Within, you are not irresponsible for trusting. You are responsible at the highest level. You are honoring the division of labor between the human and the divine. You show up where action is required. You release where control is illusion. This balance creates a life that feels guided instead of pushed. And guided lives do not burn out. They unfold. So carry this with you into the ordinary moments, the emails, the conversations, the waiting, the decisions that once felt heavy. Let your first response be stillness. Let your second response be trust. Let your action come from clarity, not fear. And when you lie down at night, do not review problems. Review peace. Say inwardly, softly, as a declaration rather than a request, it is handled. And let sleep seal that assumption. Because the deeper intelligence works most freely when you are not interfering. Morning will bring what it needs. It always does. So remain gentle with yourself as this new way of living takes root. You are not erasing a lifetime of conditioning in a moment you are outgrowing it. And growth is natural. Be still when you can. Trust when you remember. Return when you forget. Nothing essential is ever lost. God has never stopped working on your behalf. You were only asked to stop worrying long enough to notice. And now you have. Rest here. The burden is not yours. And it never was. And now, something even deeper settles in. You begin to realize that worry was never about the problem in front of you. It was always about identity. Worry asks, what if I cannot handle this? Faith answers, I was never meant to handle it alone. I do. This is the quiet correction that changes everything. You were taught explicitly or subtly that strength means carrying everything yourself, that maturity means constant vigilance, that responsibility means tension. But divine order teaches something else entirely. Strength is alignment. Maturity is trust. Responsibility is knowing where your role ends. When Jesus said, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, he was not speaking to bodies exhausted from work. He was speaking to minds exhausted from control. Heavy laden means overburdened by false responsibility. And rest is not sleep. Rest is release. Release into a higher intelligence that already sees the whole pattern while you are standing inside one thread of it. You only see the fragment. God sees the design. This is why worry is always partial. It is based on incomplete information. It imagines futures without including divine intelligence in the equation. Faith includes God. And when God is included, panic becomes irrational. This does not mean you deny challenges. It means you contextualize them. You stop saying, how will this work out? And you begin living from, this is being worked out. That shift alone changes your nervous system, your perception, your decisions. Your body begins to relax into safety. Your mind begins to open to solutions. Your heart begins to trust again. And trust is not naive. It is precise. You are not trusting outcomes blindly, you are trusting law. The law that what is aligned internally must reorganize externally. The law that consciousness precedes form. The law that when you remove resistance, intelligence flows. So worry fades, not because you suppress it, but because it no longer makes sense. You cannot worry and trust at the same time. One cancels the other. And now, slowly, trust becomes your default. Not because nothing goes wrong, but because nothing threatens your center. You may still feel concern, but it does not spiral. You may still plan, but without desperation. You may still act, but without fear driving your movement. This is the freedom Jesus lived in. He was never rushed by crisis, never pressured by appearance, never intimidated by circumstance, because he knew the source. And now, in your own way, you are learning to live from that same knowing, not as imitation, but as realization. You are not waiting for God to intervene. God is already active, and you are learning to stop obstructing. Obstruction is worry. Flow is faith. And faith feels like lightness. You will notice that even your conversations change. You speak less about problems and more about direction. You stop rehearsing fear and start allowing possibility. Not forced positivity, but grounded expectation. Expectation is powerful. Expectation is faith made practical. What you expect with calm confidence prepares the way. This is why Scripture says, "Let the peace of God rule in your hearts." To rule means to govern. Peace is not a feeling that visits, it is a principle that leads. Let peace decide your pace. Let peace decide your response. Let peace decide when enough effort has been applied. And when peace leads, worry cannot follow. So if there is something in your life right now that feels unresolved, something your mind keeps circling, do not attack it. Place it gently into stillness. Say inwardly, without drama, without pleading, "I release this," and mean it not as resignation, but as trust. Then turn your attention to what is in front of you now. The next breath, the next step, the present moment. God does not operate in the future. God operates in the eternal now. And solutions emerge from presence, not projection. As you practice this, you will discover something astonishing. Life begins to meet you halfway, not because you earned it, not because you worried correctly, but because you stopped resisting the order that was already in place. You were never meant to solve everything. You were meant to align with the one who already has. So remain gentle, remain still when needed. Remain faithful to the release, and let this become your way of living. When worry appears, you step back. When fear speaks, you soften. When pressure rises, you return inward. Again and again, until one day you realize worry has not visited you in a long time, not because life is perfect, but because you are anchored in trust, anchored in order, anchored in the deep knowing that you are not alone in this life. You never were, and you never will be. Be still. It is being handled, even now. And now, something settles so deeply that it no longer needs reinforcement. You begin to sense quietly, unmistakably, that life itself is not against you. It never was. The tension you felt was never the weight of reality, but the weight of resisting it. When resistance falls away, life feels different. Not easier in every moment, but clearer. Not softer in appearance, but steadier in meaning. You begin to understand that problems are not interruptions of divine order. They are movements within it. They are not signs of abandonment, but invitations to trust more deeply than before. This is where worry finally loses its logic, because worry assumes chaos at the center of things. And now you know, without needing to argue, that there is no chaos at the center. There is intelligence, there is sequence, there is purpose unfolding in ways the surface mind cannot map. This knowing does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You stop scattering your energy across imagined futures and gather it into the present moment. And in the present moment, you find everything you actually need: clarity for the next step, strength for the current task, grace for what you cannot yet see. Grace is not something added later. It is present when you stop resisting. This is why Jesus said, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." He was not minimizing difficulty. He was restoring proportion. The day does not require tomorrow's strength. This moment does not require the solution to everything. It requires presence, and presence is where God works. When you stay present, worry cannot survive. It feeds on projection, on imagined losses, imagined failures, imagined abandonment. Presence dissolves imagination misused and restores imagination to its rightful role. Creative alignment. You imagine not to escape fear, but to rest in trust. You imagine outcomes already held by intelligence. You imagine yourself supported, guided, upheld, and this imagining is not effortful. It is gentle, like remembering something you always knew. Over time, you will notice a shift in how quickly you return to